audio sharing as well. Yeah.
So that is what the people who are logging in remotely are going to see, the camera.
Camera. Yeah, I think that they can see the camera and the presentation. Presentation back up. This guy minimized. Guess it just stays there.
We don't let people, we don't give them a clicker. We make them stay here so that they are in the camera.
Yeah. The jump. I guess you just have a slide disabled there. It jumps. It jumps from 1 to 3, but I'm assuming that's just because you probably have a slide disabled or something.
You know what? It's not.
Yeah, it's just disabled. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You know that's a thing.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
So that looks like it's working.
Yeah. Got microphone here. Yeah, check, check.
Good to go now? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd have thought you got used to this by now. I'm back. Good morning, everyone. I was hoping not to have to do this again, but here we are. Welcome, post-tax season. I think you'll find some of us with bleary eyes and less hair than we had the beginning of tax season, but we got through it and we'll move on to an interesting, exciting presentation today. We have 68 attendees today, 38 in person and 30 online. So thank you guys for joining us. I want to mention a couple of guests or highlight a couple of guests. In person, we have Joshua Tiong. Did I pronounce that incorrectly? Close enough. And we have some students and teachers for the scholarship announcements, and they will be introduced later. But where are they? Where are they? I know there's one there. Okay, good. Perfect. Thank you guys for coming in. Virtual, we have a couple of attendees, new attendees, Aman Tagar, I hope I pronounced that right, and Rick Lang. So again, welcome. Reminder for those in person to sign your name on the sign-in sheet so that you get your PD. And with the virtual attendees, please ensure you display your name or your displayed name matches your member or registration name and complete the online polls throughout the course of today's presentations. We'd also like to remind our in-person attendees that because this is a hybrid presentation, we're going to have all our questions at the end of the meeting, at the end of the presentation rather than throughout. It just makes it easier for those online to follow along. And it allows them to make some, raise some questions as well. The other thing I'm going to mention about the presentation is if it goes beyond the allotted time, I'm just going to let the presenters continue speaking. I know Grant, he's going to continue speaking. If you've got to go somewhere, leave. We're not going to stop the meeting just so that if you need to get back to the office, please leave discreetly, and we'll just keep the presentation moving along. I'm not so concerned about time. Oh, Kelly, good to see you. Okay, I'm going to introduce Tejveer because he's going to come up and run through our scholarship awards. So Tejveer, do you want to come on up?
Thank you very much, Harvey. Good morning, everyone. As you already know that we award 3 scholarships every year to the students of local universities, University of Fraser Valley, Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and Trinity Western University. So this year's recipients and the winners are here. Our first one is Jasmeet Kaur from Kwantlen Polytechnic University. I just found out that due to some family emergency, she was not able to make it. But I think her family and the professors, Valerie Warren and Laura Dallas, are watching online. And our next recipient is Lovepreet Kaur from University of Fraser Valley. She's here. Please welcome to the stage. And I'm also going to invite our professor, Dr. Raymond Leong, to the stage. And please say a few words about Lovepreet as well. Please come over. Right here.
Hey, below my script here. Lovepreet, I encourage her to apply for the scholarship. In my observation in her class, in my class, she is quiet and hardworking like me, you know. But from her work, she is smart, have exhibit her good understanding in accounting concepts. So from her resume, I can see that she progressively working in the same organization taking up more and higher responsibilities from operation to managerial level. So yeah, I'm happy to see her to learn and apply what she has been studying for, and she will be our future CPAs. So happy to see you got it today. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Ready? Yeah, just come on.
Okay. What's the money? Oh, okay. Oh, that is important. Oh, here we go. Thank you so much.
Very much.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
coming. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for bringing the certificate. And our last recipient is Dayton Bracewell. He's from Trinity University. He already got an employment secured in Kelowna. I think that's why he couldn't make it, but he's watching online as well. And his picture is probably will be displayed on the screen right now. No? Okay, I'm sorry about that, but that's what we prepared for. But we have Professor Brent Groen from Trinity Western University to say a few words about Dayton and also accept his award on the stage. Professor Brent Groen.
Well, I could look for a picture of Dayton on my phone. I like to take pictures sometimes of them when they're not behaving. But first of all, my colleague Raymond Young in the accounting education profession, I'm wondering, do we have any UFE grads who had Raymond as a professor? Right? Well, that gives me great joy to tell Raymond he's now officially old. When I look at LinkedIn and I see these people becoming partners and becoming one of my graduates is head of North American tax for Sage, and she lives in Atlanta. And a couple of my other ones work for various Bill Gates, but they can't say which one, foundations and ownerships. And I'm like, I'm so proud. I taught them everything I know. And then you learn quite quickly as a teacher that you're going to teach people that are smarter than you. Not yet, but eventually, and then you go, oh, they are way smarter than me. But Dayton is one of the students that literally just gives me great joy. He started in his business career, interested in everything. And, he actually is graduating with a triple specialization in accounting, of course, and then a couple others don't matter. A lot of potential. And I mean, it's so great when someone with so much potential doesn't choose to become a lawyer and looks for a good profession. He's going to be a great catch. And so he's going to be really quite something. He's one of those guys that just puts his head down. He doesn't argue. He just does the work, gets it right, figures it out, and he writes neat. I'm the associate dean of the School of Business, and I'm representing Tilly Parmar. Does anybody know Tilly? All right, she used to teach at UFE until we stole her, but she's in Africa right now on a travel study, teaching people how to do the cost accounting for coffins. So she's in Kenya. But we're very proud of our graduates, and we're very proud of Dayton. Dayton will be he'll be free and available at the end of May next year. So we're very, very grateful for the support and the connection with the accounting associations, especially early in the time when the students are with us. So thank you very much. Somebody take a picture with my phone so I can send it to Tilly. And Dayton and make fun of him.
It's fun.
Oh. He's a great kid. He plays drums in church
Oh,
every
this is
week.
for you, Brent.
No, I'm gonna mail.
Oh, even me.
Why don't
Thank you, Professor Brent Krohn. And I would like to congratulate all of the recipients, scholarship recipients at this moment, and also like to thank you two of our other scholarship committee members, Agatha Clough, our president. She's not in today, and Michelle, she's right here. Thank you, everyone. Now I'm going to pass the mic to Harvey.
We're like a well-oiled machine. Okay, let's get back. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty of our meeting and why we're really here. So I'm pleased to welcome our guest speakers today. We have two. First one is Grant Gilmore. Grant is a semi-retired CPA with a passion for cross-border tax and immigration. Over his career, he ran a successful cross-border tax specialty practice and served on the board of an international professional services association. He's now pursuing a graduate diploma in immigration and citizen law at Queen's University and edits a tax newsletter on the side. With a background in genetics and a special interest in supporting clients in the STEM fields, many of whom are immigrants, Grant brings a unique perspective to the intersection of accounting and immigration. He's also actively volunteers with Scouts Canada. Co-presenting is Hannah Flostrand. With over 20 years of experience in post-secondary education, Hannah has dedicated her career to helping students and professionals find meaningful pathways forward. Following the pandemic, she transitioned into immigration consulting, driven by a strong desire to support skilled immigrants through the complex systems that shape their futures. At Warwick Immigration Canada, she works on everything from work permits and spousal sponsorships to corporate strategies like international mobility programs and LMIAs. I don't know what that is. Okay, good. Hannah brings a thoughtful, strategic, and empathetic approach to her work, and today she joins us to share insights at the intersection of immigration in Canada. Please welcome Grant and Hannah.
All right, so I want to actually explain why I'm here. Technically, I'm retired. But Harvey's known me for many years. I'm not very good at doing nothing. So I'm doing a lot of things. And this is actually a personal, I just wanted to give back to a fabulous organization, the CPA, Fraser Valley CPA's organization, and share some of the learning I had. When I retired 4 years ago, I went back to university because, hey, I had time on my hands and enrolled in this graduate diploma in immigration and citizenship law out of Queen's University. There is where I met Hannah, and what are you doing? I attract dynamic people. Let me introduce Hannah. And you want to tell a little bit more about the immigration programs?
You're tall. Oh my goodness. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Hannah, as Grant and Harvey have very generously introduced. Should we go to the slide that talks about it? No, okay. So obviously I'm a Viking with the last name Flostrand, or I married one. So I am a child of immigrants, born and raised in Montreal. Any francophone speakers? Any French speakers? Bonjour, comment ça va? C'est seulement nous deux. Alors, y a d'autres? Any other? Okay. So we will conduct the rest of the meeting in English. And I have been in higher education for most of my professional life. I've been a career educator most recently, but prior to that, admissions, recruitment, and just an advisor. I've been helping folks navigate complex systems. And so that's kind of the through line across all of my different professional careers. So now the latest adventure, immigration. And it is such an interesting time to be in this space. So we really look forward to sharing more information at a very high level because we only have maybe 45 minutes with you today. So really keeping it at a very high level of conversation.
Thank you. So who's in charge of the slides?
We are.
We are? Thank you. So one of the aha moments we all have is practicing CPAs is the realization that you don't know everything. And thank you for that. Very humble people. And that's part of what I want to talk about today is there's a completely parallel profession to ours as CPAs, immigration professionals. There's a degree program in immigration. Lots of lawyers practice immigration, though some of those lawyers are taking the same program that you can take as an immigration consultant, which is a separate parallel program. And realizing that you don't know everything, you need to reach out is really the core of what got me here today to do this presentation. An aha moment, let's call it that. Yeah. You guys like agendas, so we're going to talk about immigration in context, terminology, different ways to hire talent, because you need something to go away with, some best practices, and then there'll be lots of Q&A, and that's where you can sneak out if you need to. I'm going to start with just a realization of how many immigrants there are here in Canada. Thank you. So on the left, we have the US immigration chart. They're not done by the same people, so they don't convey exactly the same information, but context is important. If you follow the little orange reddish line on the bottom there, about 10% of the population right now in the USA wasn't born in the USA. And that's a measure of a first generation immigrant to the country. They may be citizens by the time this measure was taken, but it's where they were born is a measure of whether they're immigrants or not. Then on the right, you look at Canada. You notice also a red line, 20%. We're way more immigrant driven in Canada than the USA is. A lot of us arrived. And that is just important context. And we'll get to some other slides. You'll see that this is a real driver for Canadian identity, Canadian economy. So any of you who are in public practice, that means 20%, 1/5 of your clients are people on the immigration journey as well as the entrepreneurial journey. This chart is also really interesting. Unfortunately, the people put it together didn't keep their metrics exactly the same, so it's a little confusing. And we hid some of the metrics on the bottom so you could see it a little bit larger. But on the left is where people are coming from. And on the right is where they're going to. The left, just to put it into scale, from India, that's almost 15 million men are leaving India every year from 2024. This is from 2024. And then on the right, that scale is different. That is almost 25 million men are arriving in the USA, and over 25 million women are arriving in the USA. So those aren't direct from India to the US, but it's kind of who's providing migrants, who's receiving migrants. And there's some interesting things you note by that. For example, Canada is not 1/10 of the size of the immigration to the US. It's more like 1/6 or 1/5. So Canada receives a lot more in proportion than the US does, which is first interesting thing. You also notice that some countries both send migrants and receive migrants. The UK is near the bottom on the left and near the top on the right. So does the UK just cycle people through? And the truth, Harvey, you can speak to that later. But migration is not a straight line, is the point of this. It is a, hey, where do I fit? Where can I go? Where's my journey take me? So really important. And what you see on the right is the countries who recognize that migration is important to their economies, to their cultures. You also see, of course, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and none of those people are ever going to permanently be in those countries. They don't have the concept that we have in Canada of a pathway to citizenship. You don't become a citizen unless you're born there of a Saudi citizen or a UAE citizen. But it's interesting. A lot of people are still going there because it's economically driven. They can provide for the economies in those countries. This chart is very dynamic. You can ask Hannah how she created it. It customizes to what the person who creates it wants to see. What it's trying to show us is where the people who come to Canada come from. Well, the top source of people into Canada is India, and closely behind is China, and closely behind is the Philippines. But might be a surprise to you is how many are coming here from the UK. So they come up again, and from the United States of America. Yeah, 2024, but pre-Trump. Later in the questionnaires, I'll tell you a little bit more about the US number. It's very interesting. All right, so we wanted to make sure you didn't go to sleep, and you have papers with these quiz questions. We're going to give you the answers. We know, I know I think I know the audience. Yay, they're all picking up and reading. Okay, so what Canadian immigration pathways you're aware of? Come on. Spousal sponsorship, part of the family pathway. International Experience Canada, part of the, don't give the answers, okay. I have a coach. Citizenship by marriage, family reunification, labor market impact assessment, LMIA, which is another topic all of its own. You can invite us back if you want us to learn more about those. Refugees, other. Okay, so here's the trick. One of those is not like the others. One of those is not a real pathway. And I know we're not supposed to take things, but by a show of hands, who thinks it's A? Who thinks it's B? Who thinks it's C? Who thinks it's D? Oh, we have some people think, okay. Who thinks it's E? Oh, so listen to my question. Which one of these is not real? A, B, C, D, E, F. Nobody raises their hands. Okay. The one that's not real, there is no such thing as citizenship by marriage here in Canada. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And it's actually a bit of the F word pathway to Canada that people get told about. You might get married as part of your pathway to Canada. You might come as a International Experience Canada person and have your temporary visa and fall in love with somebody locally and then get married, and then your pathway changes to family reunification or spousal sponsorship, and you bring people to Canada and become a Canadian citizen through that pathway. But by itself, I cannot get married to somebody and make them a Canadian citizen. It is simply one of the things that could happen on your pathway. And a little bit of foreshadowing here, it's not even important. Fact is, having a marriage certificate might be a tick against you. Yeah, you want to behave as a married couple to become a Canadian citizen through one of the pathways, not be in a Canadian marriage. So glad we got your attention with that question. I want to talk about this slide for a few minutes. It's old. It's from 2019. The immigration minister has to release a report each and every year to Parliament, and different immigration ministers choose different ways to highlight things that have happened in the immigration world that year. This particular graphic from 2019, before the pandemic, really conveys a lot of information. We'll give you some updated statistics, but no immigration minister since then has done such a beautiful job of presenting the whole picture. So I just wanted you to see the whole picture. Up near the top, almost 6 million people come to Canada every year. They're not all immigrants. They're here on vacation. They're here for a business purpose, maybe a conference. They're here to install some equipment that was sold to a Canadian firm. They're here for a variety of reasons. They might actually be transiting on their way to the US. But those are the number of people who cross the borders into Canada every year. And those numbers have returned to that level since the pandemic. About 400,000, the number's getting larger, come here to work and get something called a work permit. So they show up at the border and said, yeah, I'm here and I'm going to go work for XYZ company, or I'm here and I'm going to work as an engineer, or I'm here and I'm going to work because I'm young and I'm part of a program that allows me to do that. And that's interesting. And some of those people transition into a more permanent relationship. About 75,000 of them say, I love Canada. Show me the door to become a Canadian citizen. And they transition from a temporary visa permit situation to a more permanent resident situation. But that's not the only pathway to permanent residency. There are people outside of Canada who say, hey, I understand you need doctors or electronic technologists, and I'm applying on this program that'll give me a permanent resident visa when I arrive at the border. And so there's a number of those people who show up and become permanent residents. There's also people who are married to Canadians, either permanent residents already in Canada or citizens in Canada, and they're trying to bring the family back together, family reunification. Those are also direct pathways to permanent residence. And when they arrive, they get their PR visa at the border, and now they're a permanent resident. So the point of the two numbers side by side is to illustrate that not every pathway has a temporary residence component to it. Some people come and arrive with a permanent component. And the permanent residents then become citizens if they elect to. It's a big bar on the bottom, but it's just a matter of highlight. There are also direct to market kinds of programs. Occasionally, the Canadian government says, yep, we really want this kind of person in Canada. And this kind of person, illustrated in this slide, though it's only one of many programs, is French-speaking permanent residents. They're coming to Canada under a special program that requires them to speak French, be fluent in French, and not live in Quebec. We can unpack the politics of that later. But it's just interesting that there are direct programs for certain kinds of people, certain backgrounds, certain designations, things like that. There's a question Hannah's saying, so look at your sheets and answer the question, those people online. All right, so now to update the figures, 2024 to 2026, when we had some very aggressive immigration targets, to then news got out that students maybe weren't being students here in Canada, and maybe we didn't have enough housing, to 2025, 2027 immigration targets after the government realized that there was some need to pull back on their aggressive targets. So the first round of targets, 500,000 people, over 1% of the population was going to be transition people that are permanent residents coming in each year. And if you think about your background, so my background is genetics, one of the things that happens is populations shrink unless you add to them. So we need to add to our population each year. And what's the perfect level to add? And this is a bit of macroscopic tuning. They thought it was 500,000 people. That was their plan. They've now backed off. The plan is under 400,000. Yeah, the years are a little, but the point is the government listened and has backed off. But originally we had very aggressive targets for immigration and permanent residency. Okay, why does this matter? This is back to that aha moment. Everybody in the room, please tell me you're an expert in Canadian accounting and taxation and payroll and financial reporting and audit insurance, or at least you know somebody at your table who is. Well, Canadian immigration is a parallel profession. It has its own backgrounds and its own specialities. There are certainly different things within that pathway. Immigration law is a completely separate act, all of its own, LMIAs, which we'll get to, settlement support. You can't just arrive and be successful. There's a whole transition process. And then from the employer side, what are your strategies? What kind of talents do you need? Who are you hiring from within Canada and from outside Canada? And then there's overlap, clear overlap, workforce planning, cross-border mobility. Now there's a lot of international transfers available out there. Regulatory compliance. Yep, there are audits. If you're an employer and you have people here on certain programs, you can be audited. And they're looking for specific things, just as your financial records can be audited. And sometimes they are actually auditing your financial records when they're looking at immigration. And then there's advisory roles and business strategy. So there's important overlap. I want to talk a little bit about temporary versus permanent again. So Hannah came up with this visual of potted plants. They can move anywhere, and boxes as a temporary. People come here on study permits. They go to school here in Canada, and then they may stay and get something, a special permit called a postgraduate work permit, and stay for a while on a work permit, or they may come directly on a work permit. We may have, for example, I was learning the other day about a special one-year work permit for UK trained electronic technologists to come to Canada, 1 year. And there's a lot of these programs. That's just an example. The Francophone one is another example. There's a lot of very directed programs to bring people to Canada with special backgrounds, and they get work permits. The contrast here isn't great, but they're only here for a limited time, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and then they have to leave, and they have to be able to prove that they intend to leave, or they're not even allowed in. So if they show up with their seeds to plant, they're going to be refused at the border because they have no intention of leaving. If the immigration, the border guard says, concludes so. Versus permanent residency, which some people can direct to Canada come in on some programs, or they can transition from temporary to permanent. There's economic pathways, there's family reunification pathways. And they can stay in Canada indefinitely. They just have to keep renewing their card, and they can do that for the remainder of their lives. Or they can transition to citizenship. Want to make some small distinction? There's something called a visa. All those people in that 6 million likely had visas, and some of them are visa lights, like they call them electronic ETAs, authorities to come to Canada. But when they arrive, they can't necessarily work unless they have a work permit. So you have to have both to be able to work in Canada. And your visa may expire before one, or one may expire for the other, and your passport from your home country may expire. So there's actually a bit of management needed to make sure everything expires in a sensible order. For example, if your passport from your home country was to expire before your visa or your work permit, well, you might find with you get a shortened work permit, because of course you can't be here without a valid visa passport. So there's some management there required. Permits also come in two flavors, open and closed. So I can come to Canada with a permit that allows me to work for TELUS, or for Scotiabank, or for XYZ accounting firm. Or I can come on an open work permit, allows me to work anywhere for anybody. And there depends on the program that's brought you to Canada. Question number 2 is our transition point. Hannah?
So when Harvey introduced me, part of the alphabet soup that was in my introduction was the acronym LMIA, Labor Market Impact Assessment. So that is one of the questions on our little sheet of paper. I am curious, from a show of hands in the room, how many of you have heard the term before? Okay, about half the room. And the other half is a nay, I guess. Or maybe. Is there a maybe? Oops. Maybe. Okay. So to make sure that we're all on the same page with regards to this terminology, let's talk about what an LMIA, Labor Market Impact Assessment, is. For those of you who have heard that terminology before, it is or for those who didn't know what it meant, it is really an indication to the Canadian government that a Canadian employer has tried their darndest to find a Canadian or PR holder to be able to fill the role that this employer might have. They have to demonstrate that they've marketed across different channels for at least a month, and they continue to do so because the whole point of a labor market impact assessment is to protect the Canadian labor force, to ensure that those who are Canadian and PRs have first dibs at these positions, and that truly hardship for this employer to find someone to fill those roles. There's also, as Grant was mentioning, compliance elements that an employer must demonstrate true, authentic attempts to hire Canadian, to hire permanent residents, that they are taking care of the temporary foreign workers, that they're not abusing them, that their workplaces are without abuse, and that they are taking care of those workers. And last but not least, LMIAs should be the absolute last resort for a Canadian employer to use as a way to hire and to fill those positions, because it's so technical. Again, we're trying to protect the positions for folks who are based in Canada. So that's some terminology, LMIA, Labor Market Impact Assessment. We're going to continue down the road of how else then can you potentially hire internationally hire global talent. If that is the case, that really you cannot fill the positions locally, what else is available? If I am telling you that LMIA should be last resort, let's talk about it. There's something called the International Mobility Program, where there is no labor market impact assessment required. I see people taking out pens. This is a good time to take out pens. So a reminder of what these international mobility programs mean. They are relationships, existing relationships between Canada and other countries. And so these would be like free trade agreements that are existing. So the one that probably most folks would know about would be formerly NAFTA, now CUSMA, which is now going to be under renegotiation very shortly, and we'll find out what happens there. So CUSMA, we have free trade agreements with Europe, with South Korea, Chile, Peru, so many different countries. They have many different names. So this is an existing relationship we have with countries to allow a free flow of labor across the borders. So the other one is the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. This is where LMIAs are indeed required. And so the symbolism there is more like the LMIA is the key to open the lock to allow those workers into Canada, because they've proven we needed them, or we need these workers. So briefly, again, to remember the idea of international mobility programs, this is to hire temporarily. These folks are not staying permanently in Canada. They should not be, based on what they've chosen to come through. So Grant had mentioned the Francophone Mobility Program, so folks who are demonstrated that they have French language fluency. We have folks who are coming here, they've finished their studies in Canada, and so they are eligible for up to 3 years, depending on the length of their program, for a post-grad work permit, allowing them to gain Canadian work experience and then return home. But some folks might use that experience to potentially apply for something more permanent. Grant had mentioned the International Experience Canada. So for folks who are between the ages of 18 to 30, 35, from specific countries that we have relationships with, these students or these young professionals or folks who are on an international co-op work term would have the ability to come and work in Canada. Global skill strategy is a fascinating pathway for folks who are in companies that are in hyper growth. It is an interesting possibility, but an employer has to be on a specific list demonstrating that they really need special kid glove service, where they are able to get workers who are very highly skilled, very specific niche type professions, and get their work permit within 2 weeks is supposedly the processing time, which is unheard of. It is a very unique designation. And so many other programs fall under international mobility. This is just high level opportunities. So once again, no labor market impact assessment is required for these particular programs. And again, this is the relationship that is existing between Canada and with these countries. So briefly, temporary residents, continuing on that idea of what are the ways, what are the responsibilities of an employer versus the applicant, it varies. And so an analogy that Grant and I were talking about is more so of a zipper relationship, that there's one part that the employer is responsible for, such as posting a specific eligible job, that these employees or prospective employees actually have the education, the work experience, and the specialty that this employer is looking for. They must pay a compliance fee to be eligible for this and submit an LMIA exempt job offer to be qualified, and then get an employment number to complete the work permit application. Whereas the international talent, the person who is applying for these specific roles, on their side, they have to be able to demonstrate, again, the education, the work experience, the specialty that is required. And there's a lot of subcategories. As we mentioned before, there might be, if they're part of their post-secondary institution abroad and they're looking to come to Canada to do their work experience, how have they demonstrated that through their transcripts, their studies, what have you. So spousal open work permit is an interesting consideration. You may not have both a principal applicant and their spouse in your company, but maybe you do. Know that it is, or for employers, it's a consideration for potential retention. Like, how do you ensure that the person that is working in your team, in your firm, that how might you be able to support that person? Because if they have come with their spouse, they're kind of like a package deal. They won't make decisions without their partner. So that comes into play. So there have been changes recently in the last 6 to 8 months of who is eligible for a spousal open work permit. It used to be far more broad, and now that has narrowed. So folks who are in their specific studies, they have to be specific bachelor's, master's, or PhD programs that are eligible for their spouse to have access to an open work permit. So the student would be able to go to school, and then their spouse would be able to earn money by being on an open work permit. There used to be allowance for all workers that their spouse would also have access to an open work permit. But again, that has constricted with the levels plan that Grant was mentioning earlier. They're making it much more difficult for folks who are temporary to stay in Canada. So the qualification for someone who is working in a high level position, so managerial executive type positions, and a few skilled workers are able to still continue to allow, or their spouses are able to continue getting an open work permit, but that again has constricted. It is not everyone anymore. So again, ideas or considerations for retention for the foreign worker who's on in the firm or in your organization, just to consider if they are partnered and have a spouse to consider. So yeah, just what is your role? You're not taking care of the spouse, but it's just something to consider as to what might be part of the larger package. So yes, supporting spousal work permits can potentially be better for retention, a stronger workforce, because you're not having to lose someone or that they leave right away. Something to consider. So when you are the other options that we were talking about, so we've talked about temporary foreign workers. There's no pool, there's no portal for an employer to find a permanent resident. They are already part of our society, our community, because they have demonstrated all the documentation to be deemed a permanent resident. So they are allowed to work in Canada without a work permit. There's nothing that they have to demonstrate. They have all the rights and privileges of a Canadian, minus voting and holding office. And lastly, permanent residents have specific obligations to meet to maintain that status of permanent residency, such as living in Canada for 3 out of the 5 years, for every period of 5 years, to demonstrate that they are here. They are here in the country. Has anyone heard of express entry? Fewer in the room. Okay. So for those of you who are not aware of express entry, this is kind of the lottery system that Canada uses to be able to offer invitations for temporary folks who have qualified to become permanent residents. How do they qualify? So it's an online system to manage the applications. There are 3 categories: federal skilled worker, Canadian experience class, and federal skilled trades. So through those 3 overarching categories, those would be the pathways that someone who is previously temporary could potentially become a permanent resident. And they have scores. Like, looking at some of the scores, I'm like, I don't think I would be able to come to Canada at this point because my age, I wouldn't, well, maybe education, I'd get a few points. Official language proficiency in English or in French, extra points if you have both, Canadian work experience, foreign work experience, spousal factors if applicable, so they might be seen as a team, so the points are distributed a little across the two. Additional factors such as, have you studied in Canada? Have you gained your education in Canada? So there's some few extra points that are distributed to hopefully get people to stay in Canada. So that's where that funnel imagery is coming from a larger pool, and how does that potentially how might folks become permanent residents through this program? There have been announcements earlier this year with regards to BC provincial nomination. So this is a pathway for folks. So provincial nominations are a way that each province is able to dictate, our province knows what we need with regards to our workforce, where our labor shortages, and specific to our provincial needs. Whereas the previous slide before was Express Entry, that is a federal managed program. There used to be far more spaces allotted to each province. Last year, prior to the changes in the policies, we had over 8,000 spots available. Recent announcement dropped that down to 50%. So the province has reduced capacity to say we want to pick these particular specialties or folks to join the province to work in our province. So the latest update last month was that the reduction in BC's allocation, there will only be space for about 1,000 people to be picked from the pool, or sorry, for new applications, but otherwise the pool will be just picked from what is the existing pool. The main priorities: healthcare, limited number of entrepreneurs, and skilled workers creating high impact. So, possibly tech, possibly trades, childcare. And so the remaining numbers of spots will be really already existing from the pool that has already been applied. Previously, we had streams for international postgraduate students. So folks who are already studying in the province, they're putting those applicants on hold for the foreseeable future because there's just not enough spaces for them. So, which is really unfortunate considering these folks have invested time and money to study in BC, but we don't have space for them at this very moment. So, next question. Yes.
So I really hope have the answer to this, having listened to Hannah. Can a temporary worker find a permanent path to Canada in a different stream? We didn't actually answer this question. By a show of hands, yes. Yeah, great audience. Show of hands, no. Any brave souls out there? So the important thing about the pathways is they are intersecting and intertwining. If you missed it, there are three main pathways. There's economic pathways, there's family pathways, and then we didn't talk about it, there's refugee pathways. And they can cross over. You can show up as one and transition to permanent residence and ultimately citizenship through a different pathway. You don't have to stay in one pathway. Life is never a straight line. I want to give you another metaphor to think about. At the bottom step of a escalator or a ladder or a stairway or some step forward, we have these people who come to Canada temporarily, and they're not part-time workers, but they're temporary. They're here for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. There's students, there's workers on permits, and they're here as a temporary resident. And at the end of that, they're required to leave. Some of those people will transition to being a part-timer again. Sometimes they'll switch pathways. They'll come here and they'll learn about the Francophone pathway. And I know a young lady who did this, came on a Cook stream and switched over to the Francophone stream and is now here for 4 years rather than 2 and 2, or rather than 2 only. But many of them will say, hey, I want to upgrade. I want to be a permanent resident, be able to stay here as long as I please. And they go through these pathways like the Express Entry pathway, Federal Skilled Worker pathway, those kinds of pathways to move upwards. They get more rights because they're allowed to come and go as they please. They have more responsibilities. They're not allowed to leave Canada for extended periods of time because they have to have a certain number of days in Canada. by the way, the people with the temporary ones, if they show up and leave the following day, we don't say, hey, your permit's not valid. It's valid till the end of the time it's valid. So they don't have to be in Canada, but why would they even bother getting a temporary permit if they weren't going to use it? So a permanent full-time resident, permanent residence visa is a card, and it has a renewal cycle, and it requires when they look back and test it, that within those last 5 years, you spent X number of days, 730 days in Canada, and you can continue. And there are some exceptions to those. Let's say you're married to a Canadian who has to go overseas, your days still qualify. So there's some mathematical stuff, which accountants love. I loved that when I got to that course. The next step up is citizenship. Why would you do it? Well, first of all, you get to vote, which is wonderful, but you also can't be kicked out of Canada. Any permanent resident can be kicked out of Canada. Remember that case about the Humboldt tragedy and the accident? The young man who was the cause of the accident, the driver, was a permanent resident, and he was kicked out of Canada because he got a criminal record while in Canada on a permanent resident visa. That was how he got kicked out. If he had been a citizen at the time of that accident, he could never have been kicked out of Canada. There's no, hey, you've done something terrible and you now have a criminal record. You have to leave if you're a citizen. There's some other benefits to citizenship too that permanent residents have. Their children are automatically Canadian citizens. So if a permanent resident has a child in Canada, yep, that child is Canadian resident, Canadian citizen because they're born in Canada. But that permanent resident has a child outside of Canada, that child is not a Canadian citizen. A citizen has a child outside of Canada, that child is a Canadian citizen. There are some nuances to that rule as well, but there's a higher level of confidence that your children will be Canadian citizens if you're a Canadian citizen. So think of it as a pathway. And you can actually step back a bit. If you find out that you're fraudulent, we have 5 minutes to go, okay. Then we can push you back and out. There's a whole department of enforcement. So let's talk about best practices. Anybody know what a 9 at the beginning of your social insurance number means? Means you have a temporary work permit, temporarily here in Canada. And if you have any of those employees on your payroll, you should be asking them questions. Hey, can I see your work permit? I want to know at what day we can no longer employ you. Because those deadlines are important and they may require your participation in a transition to permanent residence or a transition to a different visa or something like that. So that's something to keep your eye on. You need to be talking to your employees. Hey, are you coming up on a renewal or an exit? You don't want to be hiring somebody or working with somebody who's got a removal order against them. Not a good thing. Consider the LMIA exempt processes before you dive into the whole paperwork hassle of an LMIA hire, because there are pathways. And when in doubt, seek help from, the immigration profession comes with different levels, just like the CPA professions, different licenses. Talk to the people about what level of license they have, what level of help. Hannah has the highest level of license. Some people are not allowed to, for example, enter tribunals related to immigration. When I graduate, Hannah now can enter immigration tribunals as readily as a lawyer can. And so we're here.
We just can't go to federal court.
Oh, yes. Please don't go to court because we can support you, but we can't appear there. But a tribunal is a court-like setting and settles most immigration matters where we are allowed to go. Think of it as everything under court. So here's my contact information. I don't work for anybody. I'm retired. I do a lot of side hustles, And Hannah works with Warwick Immigration Canada and does this every working day. Questions? We'll leave it on the contact page. Hannah's very astute. She has a barcode. We also have sheets.
Yes, at the back of your handout, should you need, or if you didn't follow along and you're missing some of the answers to the questions, you can contact either one of us.
And I'm just going to push you off the head.
Are there questions from the online audience? Harvey's
There's
getting a
one from the
microphone.
back with
Oh.
the hand up.
Yes.
Harvey will handle this.
Okay.
But immigration's always been my point. I know recently that we reduced the number of.
Mhm.
Do you consider, do you consider refugees as part of that number?
We can't control the number of refugees that show up at our, we can't control the number of refugees that show up at our border. But we do know the pathways that they take to arrive here. To get on a plane to come to Canada, you have to have something called an ETA. We won't issue you one unless you have some kind of visa program to get you here. Refugees rarely are eligible for visa programs to enter Canada, though sometimes they are. There's a long undefended border which people walk across, and we can't control the number of people that walk across that border into Canada.
Once they become eligible or they come into Canada, across the border, and they're considered refugees, do we then vet them to see whether they can stay in Canada?
So there's a lot of refugees in the pipeline. They show up, they get registered, and then they wait.
And are they employable while they're
They
here?
can get a special work permit, and those work permits are timed to predict how long the wait currently is, and sometimes those work permits expire. We don't want them drawing on the system necessarily, so that's why they get work permits, so that they can go and become employed.
And just when you are able to bring in an employee to work, do they have to have any qualifications with regard to speaking the language?
Yes, they do. So the International Mobility Program has requirements built into it, so they can't get their visa and work permit pair if they don't meet those criteria. Though some of the countries have different standards, and the real criteria comes when you try to become a PR. There are tests involved in that. Wow.
I do have a question. I've got the mic, so I'm in control. I do have a question. Is there any, I mean, connected to Kelly's point about refugees, is there any, I want to say coercion isn't the right word, but direction of immigrants or refugees to certain parts of Canada? BC, lots of people want to come in to live in BC.
Yeah.
Not quite sure about Quebec, but that's a different matter. But seriously, think that places like the Yukon or Northwest Territories, where I imagine that
So no, they can't direct refugees. They show up, but we do house refugees while we're trying to figure out what to do with them. I was in Niagara Falls 2 years ago during off season. Guess what is in Niagara Falls during off season? A lot of empty hotel rooms with a lot of refugees in them, or refugee claimants in them. So when I was walking the street, so it's interesting. So it's a huge challenge, and I don't know that I have answers, but maybe we put them in hotel rooms in Denver. I don't know.
there's you don't get bonus points for volunteering to go and live in a less desirable part of Canada.
Oh, under economic pathways, yes.
There's the rural community immigration pilot. There's the francophone community immigration pilot. So there are potential pathways for permanent residency. They're not specific to refugees per se. It's open to folks who are interested and feel a connection to living in those communities. It is not a free ticket either. It's very competitive, and the numbers of spots available are quite low. So it's an interesting option. And I think to soften some of the tensions that we might feel in the larger metropolitan areas, that there's more to Canada than Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver. So there is an option. There are options outside, and there are many more programs to come through to Canada than just the ones that I think people typically know. So, but yeah, it's interesting to hear the questions.
So let me just get something here about refugees. I hear in your question, if they show up and they're willing to go somewhere, we're more likely to accept them. No, the refugee doorway is you have to have a reason and a valid risk to your person to be allowed into Canada from where you are. Just because you want to show up in Canada doesn't make you more eligible as a refugee. But there are a limited number of people who will pathway switch and go, oh, I arrived under the wrong pretense, and maybe I should be somewhere else, but there's only a very limited number.
How long is the average work permit issue? How long is the average work permit?
Again, it depends on the program. For example, there are some International Experience Canada program or agreements. And so those would be 2 years for the first participation, and then a second participation would be a year. Some work permits would be up to 3 years, depending on, again, the contract, the type of program. So it's variable, very variable.
And can they be renewed easily?
Depends again on the particular program and the particular work permit that they're on. Yes.
But you can also switch.
Yes.
So we both know a young man. Oh, we both know a young man who came in on one program, coming towards the end of it, switched to a different program. He's like a new face in Canada. So ended up here with a total of 3 years, 2 under one under another. And I described a young lady I know who came under a 2-year program and switched to another 2-year program. So it's possible to not necessarily renew, but to continue to be in Canada. Any more questions? Oh.
With respect to the slide where you talked about speaking with your workers who have visas and those kinds of things, in the pre-qualification HR hiring phase, there's often, I guess, a thought that if you ask them about their Canadian status, that might be discrimination or viewed as discrimination. So do you have any experience or tips in terms of how to handle those types of questions? It seems to be less of an issue right now, but certainly during COVID, there was a high applicant.
It's the whole privacy thing. You can't, like the hiring, you can't ask a person if there's a reason that they may not continue to work after you've hired them. But you have to put that in the context of, we don't want that person to suffer hardship because they failed to keep us informed about things we could have helped with. So yeah, there isn't answers necessarily there, except that describe scenarios in which they would want to willingly share that with you. And you can certainly ask, as soon as I give you a social insurance number with a 9, hey, I noticed you have a 9. Can you tell me about that? Yeah.
We see that Canada now is not welcoming immigrants and international students. So in your opinion, will there be some changes in the future? It affects everything. Real estate price, housing, jobs, school.
I need to get my crystal ball out of the shop. When that is out of the shop, I will be able to answer the question. We have just elected a new old government. we are seeing, the cabinet shuffle has not yet completed. And so that is still up in the air exactly what the continued direction with regards to immigration is going to be from our government. My understanding right now, it is going to stay status quo. I think many invitations to the party were given out. And so now there's a bit of a constricting to regulate and to recalibrate with all the other factors: housing, healthcare, all of the infrastructure that we need to take care of who's here. So my understanding is like steady as she goes for now. Who knows what the future will hold with regards to, yes, the higher education has been very much transformed by international students. I've worked in higher education for the past 20 years. And so seeing the variance, the change that has happened in higher education is fascinating. I work at Langara College, or I'm still connected to Langara College. Fellow instructors who teach international students will have nothing or no one to teach to by next January. So they're going to be looking for work in the next couple of months. So I don't know, is a grand answer to that.
Wow. Pardon me?
It's an early morning, so I don't know if everyone's still kind of warming up still, no?
Hearing no more questions, I'm going to hand it. Hearing no more questions, I'm going to hand it back to Harvey. Thank you very much. That was wonderful insights there.
Thank you.
Being an immigrant myself, I can relate to some of the challenges.
It took me a long time to get my citizenship, and the fear of being deported for doing something wrong was one of those. But thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Just a couple of things. I forgot to mention, you'll find one of these cards on your table. We're trying to grow the membership. I think we're in the high 70s. If on your travels out in the real world, you come across a lost accountant that needs a refugee status or whatever, give them one of the cards, encourage them to come onto our meeting. We do have a program where we will give them a freebie first time attendance. We want to expand our reach and grow our membership. So out on your travels, please take one of these and hand it to various lost accountants out there. Our next meeting is Thursday, June the 5th, where we have Sean Osterheimer and Darren Reddies of the Answer Company making a presentation about the evolution of finance, financial management and modernization. I don't think I have any other comments. Just don't forget to sign out if you haven't done so. And thank you for your attendance and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.